Next Wave has arrived, the newest combined army sectoral representing the efforts of the occupied human territories to achieve something resembling self-governance under the evolved intelligence, led by and shielded by Achilles and his team. This new faction has been teased, and a trailer has dropped, and now we have profiles and sectoral charts to dig into and start to get an idea of what this faction will look like. So, what we'll be talking about in this video. Next Wave, first impressions and expected faction identity. We don't have a complete picture at this stage, but over the course of this video, we will be covering all of the profiles for all of the units that are available in the upcoming action pack, and that's enough to start to give us an idea as to what the faction's identity might be like and how they might play. We'll be taking a look at that sectoral and fire team chart and then breaking down all of those profiles in detail, thinking about how they might contribute to the faction and what you might be using them for, or jumping into a sample list built using these factions plus the common combined army elements that we know are in the faction to give a 300-point list that might show off a little bit of what Next Wave will be capable of. Now, firstly and up front, big thanks to Corvus Belli, who provided the profiles and image assets to make this video. Their marketing campaign should already be underway, and I am recording and releasing this video as early as I possibly can within the limits they put on the provision of those assets so that you all get to dig into this and start getting an idea of what this new sectoral is going to look like. Now, before we talk about first impressions and faction identity, let's actually jump ahead a little bit to the sectoral and fire team charts and take a look at the picture that they paint. So, as we've done in previous videos of this type, like the one for Kestrel for example, what I've got on screen here is the faction roster for Next Wave in N5 as it was provided to content creators by Corvus Belli. Just as with the Kestrel pre-release, we don't have the full picture of the faction just yet, and there are a bunch of unknowns. If something is circled in red, it means I don't know what it is yet, and so it won't be covered in this video. And there's actually a fair bit of that. Now, we can still draw some conclusions about what's going on in this faction, but do keep in mind that there's a lot of unknowns here, and a lot of these regiments have the potential to be fairly transformative. So what are we dealing with just at the base level? Firstly, kind of down the center there, you can see the Combined Army Remote and Support package. We've got MedTech Obsidon, the usual suite of M drones, Q drones, T drones, and R drones, and Icadron Batroids, which is very important. Those are all excellent pieces. We've also, interestingly, got Unidron Batroids and Nexus Operatives, and we'll actually see Nexus Operatives can join some fire teams as a wildcard. So keep kind of their profiles in mind when assessing what you can do with some of this stuff in this faction. We've also got Cube Jaegers, which I don't think anyone particularly cares about, and Glyph Warcores, who are a new profile that we'll cover as part of this video, but are in practice just Warcores with like 1 extra point worth of kit, and which represent the bottom end of what the faction can do. There are also a lot of characters that we mostly already know what they do, but with some expectation for new profiles. For example, Bit and Kiss, Kodali, the full team Achilles, Pandora, Tusa, Drakios, Patroclus, and Achilles. Although, as noted, we will already cover during this video an updated Achilles profile and updated Pandora profile, and I would expect some updates as well to Tusa, Drakios, and Patroclus. At minimum, we can kind of hope for new profiles in addition to the existing ones for all three of them. And as we see when we get to the fire team section, actually there's a lot riding on Drakios getting 1 or 2 new profiles that make him not the complete trash bag that he is in N5, just as he has been for the entirety of his existence. Really hoping for something for Drakios because there's at least one fire team that's kind of pinned on him being at least okay, which you'll see on the next slide. In terms of new stuff after that, there is a huge suite of new profiles. Harbingers, Stingers, Rain Dancers, Cliff Jumpers, Wraith 1, Ironsides Juggernauts, Contrabandoleros, Sartroid Ranters, Sartroid Puzzlers, Tech Draken Steeljaws, Tech Draken Blackhearts, and Skyhounds. As noted before, if it's in red, I don't know what it is and it won't be covered during this video. And we can make some reasonable guesses that something called a Gearhead is some kind of engineering regiment, and that something called a Skyhound might be a flyer of some description, perhaps a combined army vehicle, perhaps something else. Now, from the roster to the fire team chart, we can start seeing the identity of this faction emerge. As before, weird things and unknowns are in red. For example, there is reference to a Kodali FTO2 profile, which isn't something that currently exists, and reference to a Tusa FTO profile, which isn't something that currently exists. Now, these could just be idiosyncrasies of how this was put together. They might mean nothing, but it does portend possible reworks that are worth just kind of keeping in mind as we assess old profiles in the context of how this new army might function. There's also just a note there, you'll see that Nexus operatives are a wildcard alongside gearheads. Now they count as harbingers. Excellent, we know what a harbinger is, we're talking about them soon. They also count as unidrons. This could just be a mistake in this profile chart. There isn't, as far as I can tell, the ability to link unidrons in this faction, so I imagine that's just something legacy that wasn't removed or similar. Now, let's talk about these fire teams, because what we've got to work with here is actually like huge fire team flexibility. One core, two Harris, and unlimited duos is best in class for how sectorials can configure themselves. That alone would mean you are almost never going to be struggling for fire team slots in this faction, but on top of that, you can see that there are just an absolute bevy. In fact, every single one of these fire teams, except for the heavies fire team, can be configured as a core or a Harris or a duo. And so with the sole exception perhaps of Morats, who just have the very simple, yeah bro, everything can go in the one fire team, form any fire team you want out of those pieces, you're good. There are a lot more moving parts here, but it is very similarly flexible. So breaking this down, the first fire team that we have, which could be a core, Harris, or duo, is the Team Achilles fire team. Now this fire team also exists in Vanilla Combined Army, but in Vanilla Combined Army it can only be a duo, and notably, it is lacking the Achilles keyword. That means that in VCA, you can't give Achilles duo bonuses. Here, you can, immediately and easily. You can give him up to core bonuses if you want, although by God, the full 5-person team would be expensive. Now, this is the only fire team that Achilles is keyworded in, but you will see that Achilles can also join almost every other fire team as he just slots into and leads anyone in this army. I think that's kind of a cool feature. And I do think it means that the Team Achilles fire team, which for completeness is comprised of Achilles, Patroclus, Pandora, Chusa, Drakios, and then can also include Kodali and Rain Dancers, I don't actually think we will see too many Team Achilles fire teams in next wave. Firstly, those are all very expensive characters. Many of those characters are required to unlock other fire teams. For example, you need Pandora to unlock a research fire team, you need Drakios to unlock a dragon fire team. And so unless you're doing something like an Achilles plus Patrocles best friends roommates fire team duo, usually you probably won't need to run Team Achilles as a Team Achilles fire team, and I imagine you'll slot them in elsewhere. And that starts with the Shadow fire team. This is nominally a fire team led by Patroclus, but you can have Harbingers as a core element. Harbingers are the line infantry for next wave, which we'll see soon. And you can get Steeljaws, Rain Dancers, and Achilles in here as well, with an easy mix of Shadow keyword troops, so you'll pretty easily get duo bonuses. Much of the time, I think we're going to see this be the basis of either a Harris or a duo. This is the cheapest and easiest way that we're aware of at the moment to give a piece like Achilles Fire Team duo bonuses, but it's also just a fairly easy way to slap a Harbinger and a Rain Dancer or two Harbingers together and just get a little easy 2-person duo that kind of functions. The sample list that we'll cover at the end of this video uses a pair of Shadow Fire teams just because they're an easy way to make use of the relatively cheap Harbinger troop, which is pretty important because, as you'll see, this is still a combined army sectoral. One of the things that we're going to cover as part of their identity is that they are paying the combined army premium on their line infantry troops. On top of that, there are plenty of absolutely deluxe pieces in here that you will want to take, so finding ways to make the best use that you can, even of cheap-ish line infantry, is a way of getting those deluxe pieces into play while still hitting just about 15 troops. Our next fire team is the Research Fire Team. This is one that is led by Pandora. Pandora's profiles broadly haven't changed, she is mostly the same, but she does have a fire team master rule now for Stingers. Tragically, we have no idea what Stingers are, but this is also a fire team that can include Achilles, Wraith One, and Steeljaws and Blackhearts. Now, Steeljaws at minimum are irregular troopers, Blackhearts we don't know about yet, but because of how useful Pandora is, actually because of the one new profile that she gets, which is Chain of Command, this is a fire team I expect to see reasonably often because Pandora is useful and so you may as well make use of her. In the list at the end of this video, we will see Pandora heading a fire team of a pair of Steeljaws, which is going to be a little bit of an odd configuration, but it'll make sense when I talk through those profiles and the list at the end. Our third fire team, and this is another core Harris duo, is the Harbingers fire team. And this fire team is going to function very similarly to the Shadows fire team. You can also have Harbingers there. The main differentiator here is that you can get whatever a Wraith 1 is. We don't know anything about that profile yet, and Chusa. Now, Chusa at present doesn't have an FTO profile, so we don't know which of his profiles will be the FTO one, but any of Chusa's profiles, like the base Chusa, just as a platform represents a potentially excellent model to slap +1 special die on. And so at bare minimum, I would expect 2 Harbingers and Tusa to be very viable here. Our final Core Harry's duo fire team is a Dragon fire team. This one is led by Drakios. You must include Drakios in this fire team, and it includes, as with all the other fire teams, Achilles, but then also Rain Dancers, which we'll see soon, Ironsides, and Steeljaws. Now, Ironsides are another profile that we'll cover during this video. They are heavy infantry, and while their profile is kind of interesting, one of their downsides is how limited their link options are. You'll see from this fire team's chart that this is the only place that Ironsides can link, and they can't link without Drakios, like period. You must have Drakios to form that fire team. And so actually a surprising amount of the value of Ironsides, which we'll cover, is going to come down to how viable Drakios FTO is in the coming update. Now, I have no information about what he's going to look like. I don't even have any information about whether he's going to change, but I really hope he's going to change. At the moment, the poor damn fool is at minimum 27 points for a grab bag of mostly useless skills. Like, actually to the point that if you tried to make an intentionally bad joke profile, you would almost reach FTO Drakios. But given in particular, he is by far the most likely place that we might see a Fire Team Master rule for the Steeljaws, I am pinning way more hopes than I would like on him getting something of a rework. Finally, we have our duo, and this is the Heavies fire team. You can see Ironside's also doable here, but only with themselves and without any keywords. If you want them part of a multi-role team doing more than just one thing, they have to be in a team with Drakios. So as much as you can pure duo them, you could only pure duo them with themselves. And I'm not 100% sure they're quite there for that, although they are probably close. This is also where we have Juggernauts. Juggernauts are the tactical armored gear. They are probably the profile that I am most excited for, and I look forward to talking about them toward the end of the video. Now, before we start diving down into profiles, just looking at what is available, the combined army core elements, and how those fire teams kind of look, what do we think that this is going to be? So here are my current first impressions of Next Wave as a faction. Firstly, I can see a lot of centerpiece units here. There are a lot of powerful characters that I'm kind of expecting to be supported by cheaper non-character infantry. It's very unlikely that you'll see every member of Team Achilles in a single list, but I do think you will see at least some of them in many lists, lending their character and the strength of those profiles, supported by things like Harbingers and Rain Dancers, etc. And speaking of Harbingers and Rain Dancers, etc., this is very much going to be a skill-centric faction. It's been billed as humans augmented by alien technology, and that does definitely show through in the stats. There are a lot of profiles we're going to be going through today that when you look at the stat block alone, really just read as human baseline standard. Ballistic skill 11, ballistic skill 12, ballistic skill 13, armor 1, armor 3. Lots of things that could almost be a Fusilier or a Zuyong in another faction until you get to the skill block, and there's just an absolute block of text that is absolutely transformative in how an otherwise baseline human kind of profile begins to operate. This is a faction with lots of access to things like combat instinct, stealth, dodge bonuses, gunfighting modifiers, tactical awareness, mimetism, and even other unique and weird stuff that really takes baseline humans and then elevates them to something that is combined army spec. The next thing, as we've just seen, is colossal fire team flexibility. Every fire team is duo capable, most of them have the core Harris duo, flexibility configuration, and there are lots of keywords inside those teams. Kind of whatever fire team you want to make, there should be a way to do it. And we're going to see one fire team master profile already without knowing exactly what it does, but the fluff blurb for the faction that accompanied these kind of indicates that there might be more coming. Team Achilles are obviously cast in a leadership role. We've seen Pandora have a fire team master, and it's pretty likely but not confirmed that maybe, say, Patroclus and Drakios might have fire team master roles as well. Rain Dancers, as we're going to see, are an irregular profile. If Patroclus is a fire team master for Rain Dancers, he makes them much, much easier to use. Tech Dragons, that's the Steeljaws and the Blackhearts, are also irregular profiles. If Drakios is good, firstly, and secondly as a fire team master, that makes them much, much easier to use. If not, or kind of regardless, that leads into the second thing that we can pull out from what we know already. That's a bunch of irregular troopers, and as we'll see, they're not cheap, but they are interesting and compelling. And so one of the things as we go through these profiles that we'll see with Next Wave is a bunch of what we might call productive irregular profiles. Profiles that are discounted a little bit by dint of being irregular, have to deal with being irregular, but have like good ways to make use of their irregular order. These are going to be 18, 19, 20, 20 plus point irregular profiles, but which are compelling and attractive just on the basis of their stat block. Now, that is going to put Next Wave up against the limits of what you might call your irregular budget. Unless there are ways to make some of these models regular, perhaps as part of a fire team, you have that issue where, firstly, irregular models in fire teams are a little bit awkward, but secondly, a list can only accommodate so many irregular models before it just begins to weigh on your ability to execute a cohesive plan. Your experience will vary based on how you play personally, but for most players, something between 2 and 4 irregular troopers is usually going to be the limit. After that, you have to start converting irregular orders with regularity, you run out of command tokens, and almost no matter how good the irregular troopers are, they just get in the way of you doing things with your list. And so these irregulars are really compelling and really interesting. Rain Dancers look pretty cool, and I very much like the Tech Dragons, but we're really going to be hanging out for things like Fireteam Master Rules to lock in how much the faction can take advantage of them. The next thing kind of to think about is hacking. Now, noting that we haven't seen stuff like Stingers or Wraith or Sartroids, etc., what we've got just from the existence of Bit and Kiss and Pandora is some of the best in class in the game entry-level hacking, where you take 2 models, you spend just about 50 points, and you've got everything you could possibly want to get in at ground level on hacking. You've got multiple different hacking arrows, you've got a killer hacker, you've got a regular hacker, the regular hacker is hard to kill, you've got a ton of pitches, this is a faction with Echidron Batroids, so you can reload that easily. Excellent. 2 profiles, plenty to do what you need to do in a hacking space, but it kind of tops out there. We don't have any information at this stage that suggests there are any like apex predators in this faction. We will see at least 1 killer hacker, I think 2, but none of them really outcompete Bit and Kiss. They're just the skirmisher with the killer hacker, the jump troop with the killer hacker. And so frankly, while your hacking is very good and very accessible, it doesn't, for example, particularly outcompete vanilla Panoceania post the blocker update. In fact, overall, it's probably a faction less able to establish infowar dominance than the Neoterran Capitoline army, which is a very weird thing to say about a combined army sectoral, but that's kind of where we're at. However, if I had to pick, having good entry level, yep, you must be this tall to ride, 2 models and your hacking needs are covered, that's a very good place to be. And for that reason, I would expect an awful lot of lists to include Bit and Kiss and Pandora. Now, in terms of limitations of the sectoral, we can expect that combined army remote package to be put to an absolute ton of work. No Imatrons here, and we don't know the AVA of R drones, but we can assume Echidrons at least are availability 2 because they're availability 2 everywhere. Those are going to be your cheapest models, right? 1 R drone, more if you can afford them, and the AVA allows 2 Echidron Batroids. That's your cheap entry level for order-generating troops that we're aware of right now, because otherwise the cheapest thing we're going to see here are Harbingers, who are 13 points. Now, that is still a little bit cheaper than Vanguard Infantry or Nox troops. It's 1 point cheaper than Vanguard Infantry or Nox troops. But it does mean that if we want to take these flashy centerpiece character units or the really cool tag, we're going to need to draw on that remote package and then be very judicious about how we spend our points elsewhere, because all of that good stuff does not come cheap. 2 other things to note, although these really do come with the caveat that we don't have the full picture yet, we're not going to see a great deal of visibility control, smoke grenades, eclipse grenades, and disco balls in the upcoming profiles. We're going to see 1, and it's on the Iron Jaw, who is a heavy infantry. Now, I don't expect something like a Morlock group 6-point smoke thrower to appear in this faction, but that is absolutely something this faction would be dying for, because having pieces like that is of huge value to any faction that can access them. Finally, just as a note, there are absolutely some Apex Predators in this faction, but they're Apex Predators in kind of a multi-role sense. We look at profiles like Achilles and the Juggernaut, and they aren't elements that spike in one direction. Something like a cutter, for example, right? A cutter is an Apex Predator gunfighting and kind of sucks at everything else. Achilles fights and is mobile and can move in straight lines thanks to the nanoscreen. The Juggernaut we'll get to when we cover him, but kind of a similar deal. And so having these models with mobility skills and close combat and good shooting, and I'm kind of qualifying Achilles having a nanoscreen as giving him a mobility skill because it allows him to move in straight lines, you will be in a situation where you have to use all of these tools at the same time. This is not, as far as I can tell, a faction that can reach gunfighting parity with combined army, but it can field some near apex gunfighters, and frankly, Mimetism, Nanoscreen, Ballistic Skill 16, theoretically possible, is, okay, yes, absolutely a very good gunfighter. but it's just going to be worth bearing in mind that some of what we'll see here at the very top end of the faction will be paying to be a good multi-role troop, and so you'll need to take advantage of the fact that your very top end are multi-role elements. Now, all of that could change if any of these unknown profiles turn out to be some kind of absolute panacea to any of those issues, right? We're at the very beginning here. If Stingers are 7 points and have disco balls, if Wraiths end up being apex killer hackers of some description, if Sartroids have smoke grenade launchers, like whatever, any of these things could be possible, and if so, they'd have a material impact on the faction. But for now, we're looking at centerpiece units supported by line infantry, huge fire team flexibility, good hacking, really interesting and compelling irregulars, but then some limitations that tend to be common to most combined army sectorals. And so with that, let's finally talk about some profiles, and we're starting with the Harbingers, New Mankind Defense Infantry. Now, Fennec Fusiliers or Kosotsu, these guys aren't quite, but they do represent what we might call new Corvus Belli light infantry design theory, where there are a bunch of profiles here that are more support profiles, but are interesting and compelling in that respect. The baseline is Combined Army Standard, though, where you pack just enough equipment and just enough additional rules onto these guys to make them 30 to 40% more expensive than everyone else's line troops. And so in this case, what that means is a pretty generic profile in terms of stats. Ballistic Skill 11, Phys 10, Whip 13, Armor 1, BTS 3 is nice. But then we have a Zapper on basically every profile, and the Combat Instinct, Courage, and Dodge +3 skills. Now, dodging on 13s is a skill that's modestly valuable but can value out in a pinch. Combat Instinct is something that I don't love paying for on every profile, but there is a hacker down here. Having a little bit of Combat Instinct can be very good. Having a single Combat Instinct hacker, because it allows you to ignore stealth, can be very good. And so we'll see those profiles work their way into lists. Otherwise, look, there's a Lieutenant profile, a Combi Zapper profile, a HMG, a missile launcher. I would not really expect any of those particularly to be taken, but we get into some interesting stuff after that. The best gunfighting Harbinger is the 17-point AP Marksman Rifle Zapper with Ballistic Skill Attack -3. Now you've got to break a pistol on the profile to complement the AP Marksman Rifle's range bands, or you could pair it with a model that has, for example, a Vulcan Shotgun or an AP SMG. And this guy is basically going to be the cheapest effective gunfighter in the faction that we've seen so far. Ballistic Skill 11 is not fantastic, but you can easily have him rolling 3 dice plus 1 special die, and Ballistic Skill Attack -3 gives him a chip in a chair basically into most non-Warhorse gunfights. For 30 points, you can get him and a 13-point specialist, and once we have exhausted all of our remote allowances, that is not the worst way to bulk out a force. Up next, we have 2 profiles with Vulcan shotguns. One is a Mine Layer, Vulcan Shotgun Zapper, and Shock Mines. Not bad for 14 points, difficult to be proactive with, but could be a good addition, for example, to a larger fire team that includes and is aiming to give TUSA bonuses. And then a much more interesting but more expensive hacking device, Mine Layer. 18 points puts him as one of the most expensive Harbinger profiles, but you get an interesting kit for what you're paying. You get a Vulcan shotgun, a Zapper, and EM Mines with Mine Layer on top of being a hacker profile. Whip 13 BTS 3 is not bad, with 6 cents. This guy isn't going to feature in the list that will show off at the end of the video, but he was very, very close to being included. Had other points, I would have added him in. This guy is the 3rd model that you would add to your hacking package after Pandora and Bait and Kiss, just to have the 6 cents ARO included in your hacking network. Genuinely quite useful. 18 points means that he is not a discount hacker in some other line infantry we see, like heavily discounted hackers. In this regiment, that's surprisingly discounted profile goes to the Harbinger Forward Observer. This one is interesting. An AP SMG is not an amazing gun, but it does pair well in terms of range bands with the AP Marksman Rifle profile. It has a Zapper like everything else, which offers some very effective forks at short range against armored enemy troopers. It's got a Flash Pulse +1 burst, yeah, that's okay. Most importantly, it has a Wild Parrot. Wild Parrots are outstanding deployables, perimeter weapon EM mine deployables, which is just extremely useful. And as we've already noted, this is a faction that is very likely to be taking Icodon Bactroids just for order-generating troops. That means you'll have baggage, that means you have an order outlet. Anytime you've got a spare order, you can have that Forward Observer Harbinger inside 8 inches, throw out a Wild Parrot, reload for free from baggage in the States phase, and bam, you've got a useful piece of battlefield material, and you can place more of them in future turns if you need. Now, next up, there's a 15-point Paramedic Combi Rifle Zapper. Definitely pales in comparison to the Forward Observer just in terms of utility, but potentially worth including in particular if you have a model like Achilles, who is a good paramedic target. Overall, as noted, these guys don't quite reach Fennec Fusilier status in terms of super versatile, many viable profiles, support and offense, etc. line infantry, but they're not bad. You get 3 of them in the action pack, and I could very easily see using 2 or even 3 of them in a list. In fact, we're going to have 4 of them, I believe, in the list at the end of this video, although with the caveat, obviously, that lat list is written using the limitations only of the profiles we've seen so far, and 2 of those 4 would be on the list of units to cut for better things once we have a better idea of what else is available. Now, our next linkable troop is Isaac Clarke from Dead Space. Sorry, I mean Rain Dancer's Light Assault Company. And this is where we start to see that identity that I talked about with the compelling irregulars emerging, because these guys are irregular and they're very interesting. But they're irregular, and so unless there's a fire team option for them, under a fire team master that makes them regular, we're going to have to be a bit judicious in our use of them. Now, what do we get for our 18 to 24 points of a regular trooper? We get move 6-2, excellent close combat with CC 23 and martial arts 3. That's a very good close combat skill, and all of them have got good damage DACWs. We've got excellent dodging with Phys 12, dodge plus 3, and dodge plus 2 inches. They're not half bad gunfighters with ballistic skill 12 and mimetism -6, and they don't have frenzy or no cover. Any points discount they're getting from being irregular, which means you can have these guys in cover and gunfighting, and they can be a real tick to dig out. And a few of them actually have longer range weapons, which you might genuinely see them make use of and be very frustrating to deal with in that context. They are stealth and religious, they've got armor 1 BTS 3, and you can have 3 of them in a list. Now, there are 4 FTOs and then 1 forward deploying profile. The FTOs are all broadly similar. We've got a submachine gun chain rifle grenade profile, a Red Fury chain rifle profile, a ballistic skill attack +1 burst contender chain rifle grenade profile, and a ballistic skill attack +1 burst light shotgun chain rifle grenade profile. Any of these is potentially interesting because their close combat skills are excellent, they are relatively mobile. If you can deliver them to close combat, they will pay off. But I think it's the ones that offer a little bit of gunfighting, especially that contender profile, where even just as an ARO, it's potentially really annoying. If it's in a team, it's got a special dice, its range bands are really good. It's firing on 12s, yes, but it's got mimetism -6. It's in cover, that thing could be a real pain to deal with. But its usefulness after that, basically for all of the FTO profiles, is going to be down to whether or not you can either make use of their irregular order, perhaps by breaking them out of a fire team to go and kill something once you've delivered them to the enemy, or if someone like Patroclus, for example, has fire team master. If he doesn't, taking the full AVA of these, and you get, I want to say, 2 of them in the action pack, is going to really strain your command tokens until you start breaking them out and spending them on their way. In that vein, possibly the most interesting of these profiles actually is that 5th and final one. This is the one that isn't an FTO. It's the ballistic skill attack +1 burst, forward deployment 4 inches mine layer profile with light shotgun, chain rifle grenades, and EM mines. If there isn't a fire team master or some way to turn these guys regular in a fire team, this might actually be the most interesting profile, and that comes back to the idea of the productive irregular trooper. Irregular troopers, you can put more and more of them in your list if you have a really good plan for how each of them is going to spend their order every round. Now, you still hit that limit of like 4 troopers in a list perhaps before you start to really impinge on your other ability to do things, but one of these guys, for example, the forward deploying mine layer, has a really clean line for how he's going to spend his orders on turns where he isn't the one sucking down regular orders to go and kill things. And that's because he's got the EM mines. Like, he gunfights just fine if he gets in close range. That's a burst 3 light shotgun, burst 2 chain rifle with mim 6 that can take cover. That's scary to attack with. But if it isn't the turn for him to attack, he has EM mines. He can just move 6 inches and lay an EM mine, and bam, he's done something useful. And so when we get the full army update for these guys, when people have got action packs in their hands, when games are starting to be played, when you're doing your list construction, if there's a fire team master for these guys anywhere, fill your boots. If there's not, that's the profile I'd be looking at, the forward deployment mine layer, because he's the one that can spend his irregular order really well every turn without being something you have to spend command tokens on, something you have to babysit. He will just be valuable every round until it's time for him to launch an attack and earn back his 23 points. Now, our final meat and potatoes troop, at least nominally linkable, the regular heavy infantry for the faction, is the Ironsides Heavy Mobile Regiment. Now, these guys are another grab bag of skills. One of them comes in the action pack, and I think they're really threading the needle behind, or rather between, bling and basics. I'm not quite sure where I land on them yet. I think they may be tilted 5% toward the blingy, but they do have some really interesting things going on. Just in terms of the raw stat line, not incredibly impressive. 6-2 move, ballistic skill 13, phys 12, whip 13, armor 3, BTS 6 with 2 wounds. There's not really any way to get around the fact that those are basically Zuyong infantry stats. These are not orcs, these are not griffin troops, right? Their ballistic skill is only 13, their armor is only 3. Those are attributes that matter. Where they start to make up the ground is in the skills, and the skills are weird because what we have here is combat instinct. Okay, as mentioned, don't love paying for that, but I'm willing to. But then we've got ballistic skill attack -3, which is excellent, albedo, which is situational but not bad, and tactical awareness, which is really good. All of these guys have tac aware. And so kind of figuring out how to make use of them in that context, where maybe we need to treat them less like Zuyong infantry and more like lower armor Shang-Chi with a grab bag of other tools, kind of tells me they have to have some potential, although at the points cost, remember that these guys are competing with things like Patroclus, like Tusa, etc. Now, weapon loadout. We've got a multi-rifle light flamethrower disco baller profile, also available as the lieutenant. I think this guy bears mentioning particularly as the LT profile, because I am always here for a lieutenant with 2 orders to spend, especially if that lieutenant is the only source of visibility control in the entire faction. This is the only disco baller we're going to see this presentation. If you want to be able to throw down an Eclipse template, it's on this guy. Now, good news, this guy, if he's your LT, generates a regular order, attack aware order, and an LT profile order, and is in a faction with some of the best baggage in the game, so he can just spew those things out and reload if you need him to. Now, multi-rifle and light flamethrower isn't a world beater of a weapon loadout, but we could make it work, particularly since he can stage himself really easily, and then hopefully go on to fight with that mix of BS stack -3 and albedo. We've also got some other interesting profiles. There's an AP HMG profile here. Now, this guy is pricey. 44 points is not cheap, but it's an armor-piercing HMG. Now, a Mormaer this guy is not, but sometimes you just need AP rounds, and putting those on a trooper with visibility mods and tactical awareness and nominal linkability is useful. We've got a heavy rocket launcher profile as well. It's cheaper. I don't think I would be reaching for that. Yes, it is 7 points cheaper than the AP HMG, but it is just a burst 2 HRL, burst 2 +1 special die. I'm going to want the burst, thank you very much. And so I expect I'd be reaching for the HMG much more over the HRL. And then finally, we've got our only specialist. This is an SMG emitter heavy infantry for 34 points, but he is a killer hacker with tac awareness and combat instinct and BTS 6. Now, 34 points probably puts him a touch out of reach for most lists, but you could feasibly run a duo of the AP HMG and the KHD. That's a specialist and a gunfighter, and they both have tac aware. And if Drakios doesn't get a glow up, that's probably the only way to link these guys to get a special die. Now, at that price point, it's as expensive as a tag, and there's a very interesting tag in this faction, but it is something we should probably leave on the table. For myself, I think the HMG is a profile that I will only occasionally reach for, most likely as part of that HMG KHD duo, but I do think from time to time I will actually look at that lieutenant as a viable profile, particularly if I'm running lists with more short range elements, with these cool lethal dangerous close combat models, or with more of a scenario focus. I'm just going to want the ability to throw out disco balls, and having those disco balls be able to be generated turn on turn with basically free orders on a model that can otherwise roll up its sleeves and take some active role in winning the game and going and gunfighting things, that's not the worst package. I've been paying similar points in Toha for a model that mostly does visibility control for a very long time, and so the Ironside Lieutenant isn't actually too much of a stretch. Oh, just finally to note, this is the first time we'll see, but not the last time, the Techno-Organic skill. What does that do? It lets you be healed by either a doctor or an engineer. I don't at this stage have more information than that. I don't know how it interacts with medkits or gizmo kits. I don't know if this guy can be gizmo kitted, for example, but given that the tag that we'll see has this rule and has the usual tag gizmo kit pH equals X, but doesn't have a medikit equals X rule, I'm going to default to assuming it just interacts with doctor and engineer, and otherwise you would need a medikit to heal an Ironside, but we'll see when the rules come out. Now, our next profile is Achilles, and this is showcasing the changes to Achilles with the next wave update. Now, there are a few things to note here. Firstly, new profile, Plasma Rifle Achilles. I'm not 100% sure that an X-Visor plasma rifle is better than an AP Spitfire, but I do really like plasma, and Achilles is very good at running at people. The other notable change, or the next notable change rather, is breaking out the lieutenant and non-lieutenant profiles. If Achilles is in generic combined army, he can't be the lieutenant. If he's in next wave, he must be the lieutenant. That's kind of an interesting and thematic change. Given that this guy is pretty good, he's going to be attractive in both armies, but you're therefore going to need some kind of a plan for how you utilize him with either of those limitations, either because he can't be or because he must be the LT. Actually being forced to be the LT is very thematic in next wave, but it does kind of put limits on your list construction. I would love to run non-Lieutenant Achilles alongside a Lieutenant Ironside, but I can't. And so you kind of have to make that work. And then the third, and look, frankly, the most significant change, is that he is a whopping 10 points cheaper. Now, technically, he has had a small reduction in the power of his CC weapon. It's gone from PS4 to PS5. That's really not a huge deal on a CC24 Martial Arts 4 model with an explosive CCW. 10 points is a big discount. Achilles has gone from being tag costs to actually kind of sub-tag costs, or at least light tag costs, and that's pretty appealing. Now, we do need to beware the anchoring fallacy, right? We can go into army at time of recording and go, oh, Achilles is 72, therefore he is worth 72 points. Wow, 10-point discount, incredible savings. And that is the same trick that retailers will get you to fall for when they have a pair of jeans advertised as 70 or $100, but marked down 50%. The anchoring fallacy is a trap. We really should be assessing this guy on his own merits, but I don't know, 62 points sounds pretty good to me. If we compare him to something like a Hatamoto Imperial Guard, he is significantly more expensive, 25 to 30 points more expensive. They clock in from memory at between 35 and 41 points. And Achilles basically represents 2 Hatamoto worth of durability smushed into one model. He is a much more dangerous gunfighter with much higher ballistic skill, more dangerous rounds including AP on the Spitfire, better armor, a higher wound count, forward deployment, and marginally better close combat. But for all of those significant upgrades, he pays a lot more. Is that worthwhile? Well, look, Hatamoto are generally considered excellent, and I don't see any reason not to consider Achilles to be pretty damn excellent, and this points discount is definitely going to give him a push in terms of inclusion for those who are on the fence. It is actually kind of going to disrupt vanilla combined armies lists who are using him a little bit, I think, because you can't have him as the lieutenant there, and accommodating a 62-point non-lieutenant profile is liable to take a little bit of doing, but I suspect he will work there as well. This is just a really good price point for a very, very powerful profile. Up next, we have Contrabandoleros, our skirmisher for the faction, and these guys are really interesting. This is another case where there is an absolute grab bag of skills here, but they are kind of compelling. Now, the cost of these things starts adding up, right? The cheapest one of these is 26 points. You can't take a lot of them. Your double can't take a lot of them in a faction with 13-point minimum line inventory. But there's some cool stuff here. So the baseline profile, very standard human infantry. Ballistic skill 12, whip 13, armor 1, BTS 3. Nothing to write home about. The skills, once again, are the interesting part. These are a camouflage, mimetism 3 skirmisher with surprise attack. Okay, that's pretty normal. Hidden deployment, that's cool. Infiltration phys equals 16. That's really interesting. Now bear in mind, that comes with a -3 to the roll if you're attempting to infiltrate past the halfway mark, right? Usha McNeil with her infiltration phys equals 19, these aren't, but you can take 2 of these. Both of them could attempt that roll. One of them's very likely to succeed, at least, and once they've succeeded, there's a mine layer profile, there are hacker and killer hacker profiles, they have zappers, they have hidden deployment, they can potentially make a mess. This is really high risk, high reward, like more so, almost than a drop trooper. You're being asked to make the same kind of calculus, and that's not going to be for everyone. But given you've got the choice between infiltrating normally or pushing it on a 13 for some really high payoff, there are some people who'll find that really compelling. Now, if you were to assess these just as a regular infiltration trooper, they're a touch overcosted. Just a touch, some still potentially high payoff. But when you consider them in the context of, yeah, okay, but sometimes it will be the use case to push that infiltration skill, that's really interesting. Now, what have we got in terms of weapons? The baseline, 29 points, you will probably never take, combi rifle, zapper, and paramines. I like all of those things. I do not like 29 points. There are other more compelling profiles. Next up, we have 2 hacker profiles, a regular hacker and a killer hacker, 29 and 27 points respectively, submachine gun, zapper, and decharges. These are good choices, basically. These are your most probable specialists, that or the forward observer. The forward observer has a boarding shotgun rather than an SMG, has a flash pulse, but otherwise is an FO and is a point or 2 cheaper. Of those, basically take whichever you can afford. These are the guys you use if you need a midfield hidden deployment specialist. With decharges, these are all useful things. They are spec trained, not veteran, so they're not a complete classified package. but they are still a high value specialist troop with that interesting upside. And then finally we have the mine layer profile, and this is where it gets spiciest with that infiltration phys equals 16, because here is where you have the, oh, what is the payoff, right? Oh, what can I really push? Frankly, pushing a hacker with a zapper, that's already pretty good with infiltration phys equals 16, but a mine layer with a zapper, that's some serious payoff. That has the potential to inflict a fair bit of pain on your opponent quite early in the game. And that combination of equipment, mine layer, shock mines, zapper, SMG, surprise attack, mimetism, and passable ballistic skill is potentially very cool. Now, these are troops I think I will probably use modestly, right? Rarely. It's already been tricky enough for N5 to convince me that drop troops are finally worth the risk. It has, right? But it's taken me some time to get there. I like having my 15 orders available at the beginning of the game. I like not rolling the dice on deployment skills, and only really in N5 have parachutists and combat jump models across the board become attractively enough costed for me to be willing to roll those dice. This is kind of in about that space. These are all closing in on 30 points. That's 10% of the points I have available to my army. And if I push it, they land with the same regularity as a drop troop. That's a risk that you are having to make. Now, the payoff is cool and interesting. I think this is compelling design. I think there are some people this will resonate hugely with. Like, I know in the audience somewhere, someone has seen this, seen that infiltration score, and begun rubbing their hands together and cackling. And that makes them good profile design, right? Where they are compelling, but not an auto-include. They've threaded the needle quite nicely on this, and I think this is going to be one of those profiles that we start hearing stories about relatively soon after next wave releases. Now, much less significant, we have this creepy little squid guy. He's a weird little dude. He comes as a pre-order bonus with the action pack, and he's a war correspondent. Or specifically, he's a 4-point war correspondent with dodge +3. Now, being able to dodge on a 14 on a model like a war correspondent does absolutely have the potential to be very annoying in some games. War cores otherwise already have a very known value proposition. Being 3 points, or in this case 4 points, is a value proposition. He is the cheapest model in the Sectorial, and sometimes you have a list that is 296 points and 14 troopers. He is your 15th trooper, and that is the role that he serves, and he's useful enough in that role. Next up is our jump troop, the cliff jumpers. I am going to call these things cliff racers. You cannot stop me. Morrowind has burned that name in my brain. And actually kind of in stark contrast to the Contrabandoleros, these guys are a very lean, very dangerous combat jump trooper. In fact, these are exactly the kind of combat jump trooper that I was talking about when I said N5 has finally convinced me to be willing to roll the dice on these guys, because 21 to 23 points for some really quite lethal profile options is very compelling. Now, what do we get for our points cost here? Ballistic skill 12, armor 1, BTS 3, and 1 wound. Just line infantry kind of stats. Although I will make a cheeky little call out to Phys 10, but dodge +3, Phys and combat jump Phys equals 13. Oh, is that not really just a Phys 13 profile? Well, technically, if you get hit with adhesive ammunition, it's not. But yes, otherwise it is the patented Corvus Belli profile optimization, but for a regiment like this, I don't mind that at all. Now, once again, and we can sense a theme here, the bling is in the skills, and they are very good skills. Ballistic skill attack +1 burst, and mimetism. That's excellent, and that just slams lethality into these guys who otherwise land on 13s and fight okay with ballistic skill 12. And the profiles are not mucking about or being silly. We have the dangerous profile that is there for gunfighting and trading, a light shotgun, remember that'll be burst 3, a heavy flamethrower, remember that'll be burst 2, and paramines, which gives you a very effective fork in addition to anything else you're doing. We have a KHD, submachine gun and zapper and decharges. Cool, it's a specialist with decharges. Not, again, a veteran or elite trooper, but it is a Whip 13 BTS 3 KHD who can fight and has a zapper, etc., and 23 points is appealing. And then finally, Forward Observer, boarding shotgun, and paramines. This guy is basically the concession you make over the light shotgun flamethrower if you think you need this model to be a specialist. The flamethrower +1 burst is like very scary. If it rolls up behind a link team, you don't have that template on the Forward Observer, but you can at least lay a paramine. And if you don't think you need the fork, well, hey, look, ballistic skill 12, burst 3 mimetism on a boarding shotgun, that will clean things up. You creep up behind a tag with that, you will put wounds on it. This is a cool, dangerous profile that you can kind of afford to roll the dice on, because 21 to 23 points is just kind of affordable for that chance to blow out a game. Jet propulsion is an excellent rule. 4-4 move, yep, totally fine. They will effectively be moving 6-4 on most of their movements, and then landing to take the ballistic skill attack. This is just a good, cool, lean kit, where the worst thing that can be said about them is that with 1 wound, sometimes they will trade. That is totally okay for a model like this. which is packing this much firefighting and gunfighting power. Next, we've got Pandora, effectively unchanged from her existing incarnation. You probably have an opinion on her already. I really like her because I like Ballistic Skill 12 pitches. She features in my Vanilla Combined army list because she's this interesting kind of multi-role troop. In Vanilla Combined, I take the Medikit Cut +1 Burst profile, where she is surrounded by Fizz 14 and Fizz 13 Assault Monkeys. But in Next Wave, I think you'll be taking the 29-point Chain of Command profile a lot. Now, the rest of the profile we kind of know about. She is cool, she's impressively difficult to kill, a combination of Fizz 12 dodge -6 or her 0 pain, and no wound incapacitation, makes her just very able to consistently shrug enemy attacks and sink orders, trying to put her down, and that's really useful on Chain of Command profile because Chain of Command is a skill you will want in this faction. There are some very interesting active lieutenants. Achilles is one, the Ironside is another, and the Juggernaut will be a third, and just having some kind of insurance, especially when it's on a model that is doing so much else that is useful, is just really, really valuable in this faction. Combine her with Bit and Kiss, and you've got 3 pitchers, 1 regular hacker, 1 killer hacker with Oblivion. It's all coming in for around about 51 points, and that's what I was talking about when I mentioned that your entry-level hacking here is par excellence. That is 100% of what you need to compete in a hacking game. It is not an overcommitment, and even if Bit and Kiss go down, Pandora is very difficult to perish. On top of all of that, she's picked up the Fire Team Master Stingers rule, and we have no idea what that means at this stage because we don't know what Stingers are. But if they are an irregular troop, and in that sense she is kind of a harbinger of other Fire Team Master rules we might see in the faction, I'm optimistic about that as well. Very cool profile, we'll see her in the final list. Now from here, we get into the cool stuff because it is Cyber Dinosaur time. Now, before we even get into the rules for these guys, I am obliged to like them for like 3 different reasons. Firstly, they're Cyber Dinosaurs. They remind me of Horizon Zero Dawn and Far Cry Blood Dragon at the same time, and that's just cool as hell. Secondly, narratively, it's easy to miss, but these guys are kind of an oblique reference to the Australian Emu War. The species that developed them and donated to them through the human harbingers that exists under the AI is called the Krotala, and there's reference in these guys' fluff to efforts by the Krotala to suppress the native Tektrakan population with military means, and if you are an Australian, that will sound familiar to you. It even notes that the Krotala enjoyed limited success, which, yep, that's the Emu War. Not sure if that was an intentional reference, but I am extremely here for it, and as an Australian, I like that a lot. Now, in terms of the profile, this is really interesting because this is the second half of that Rain Dancer equation where we're talking about very compelling irregular troopers, but not like cheap. These things are not spammable. Technically, they're AVA 4. But 18 and 19 points does not get you a spammable profile. These guys aren't like Tiger creatures. Well, actually, in a sense, they're a lot like Tiger creatures, but a primary difference is that you can't just fill out a list with cheap irregular warbands because these guys are not cheap irregular warbands. They are expensive. They are warbands, but 18 and 19 points has to buy you a lot. And kind of happily, it does. These guys clock in at Silhouette 5, so they're a little chonky. 6'4 move, nice and fast. CC 23 with Martial Arts level 2, so no slouch in close combat, and they are packing an AP viral close combat weapon. Now, obviously, that's most dangerous against biological profiles, but a damage 4 AP weapon that targets BTS is going to be dangerous against anything. If these guys connect in close combat, they will usually beat any non-expert. They've got the Techno-Organic rule, so they can be healed by a doctor or an engineer. They have Fizz 13, but dodge -3, which if they choose to use it, and are in cover, potentially makes them very difficult to put down kind of at range or otherwise, as that is a skill that can just sap enemy orders, because there's no counter, right? There's no counter to dodge -3. That negative always works. It's not countered by Warhorse. It's not ballistic skill attack -3. And so you can have these guys absolutely slurp down an enemy order pool in ARO while they try and put them down. That's really interesting. If they succeed a dodge roll on Fizz 13, they'll move 4 inches. And with Climbing Plus, that means they can potentially cover a lot of ground in both active and reactive turns. They've also got Immunity Critical Hit, so these guys are really difficult. With Mim 3, Immunity Critical Hit, Dodge -3, these can just be a roadblock, where you can put them in a position as a defensive troop, and if your opponent doesn't deal with them, Flash Pulses, Grenades, Viral Mines, even an armed turret with Combi Rifle. A boarding pistol gives them a template weapon. These things are just designed to be the bane of enemy order pools. If you can stage these things forward and then say, cool, you have to deal with these now. If you try and contest this objective, they'll template you. If you try and shoot them, they'll dodge -3. Anything you do, they will just be annoying with respect to. And I am here for that kind of element. They also fill in, this is the productive irregular role, where we've got on one profile a sensor and viral mines, and then the other an armed turret. Now, turrets have fallen an extremely long way since the beginning of N5. It turns out the removal of the ability to reload basically makes armed turrets far too expensive on every single profile that they exist on, except probably for this guy. I am genuinely not sure which of these two profiles I prefer. I think it is exceedingly close and down to taste. And mostly for nostalgia for the early days of N5, I'm leaning towards the armed turret. A sensor and viral mines versus an armed turret. If I've got that 1 point, I think I take the armed turret because turrets are cool. But in either case, you have a deployable. Because you have a deployable, you always have a productive outlet for that irregular order. And because you always have a productive outlet for that irregular order, you push the number of these awesome irregular pieces you get to include in a list just a little bit higher than they might otherwise be. You can only have like 1 or 2 models like a glyph correspondent in a list because they don't have a use for their orders. But you can kind of go up to 3 or 4 models like tech dragons because you're going to be using that irregular. You'll use it to move, you'll use it to lay down a turret or a mine. And then at some point later in the game, you'll go, okay, buddy, you can have 5 regular orders this turn, cross some ground, get into close combat, fork the boarding pistol and the martial arts CC attack, tear something up at speed, go and do a crime. Just like the Rain Dancers, these guys don't have Frenzy. Any discount they're getting from being irregular, and with the durability that they have. Okay, look, it's Armor 2 BTS 3, but it's a grab bag of defensive skills. It's a ton of defensive utility, and there's enough teeth there that if you go and attack with them, they'll reward that investment as well. They are also linkable, yet another reason to look out for Fireteam Master options, but in the list at the end of this video, we are even going to contemplate just linking them with Pandora to make use of a little bit of order efficiency to get 2 up the board and into defensive positions. I like these guys a lot aesthetically, I like them a lot narratively, and the profile is one of the coolest, compelling, irregular pieces I think I've seen in the existence of the game. Really interesting design, and they just look cool as hell. And continuing that theme, the Juggernauts, Armored Assault Cavalry. Now, I don't know where you stand on this personally, but I am the kind of person where, look, heavy cavalry in a fantasy wargame? Yeah, I sleep. Heavy cavalry in a science fiction wargame? That's some real shit. And I have been here for that as a concept basically since I first learned about Elder Exodites in 40k. This is some cool stuff. And the profile is pretty impressive as well. Now, I'm going to caution you against overreacting to this because it's easy to look at this and go, wait, what, it does all of these things? But I think what we do genuinely have here is a very cool and compelling tag, but not a game-breaking one. What do we get for our cost here? So these things will run the gamut from 78 at the cheapest, actually being the LT profile, up to 82 points at the top end. That is expensive for a tag in N5, although there are some tags that are more expensive. We get 8-2 move, which is about as fast as it gets on a tag. Only say the Sphinx might arguably be faster. You can cover a lot of ground with that first movement skill. Close combat is where it starts to differentiate itself. CC22 Ballistic Skill Attack +1 burst with guard. Now, we'll come back around to that, but that is really the signature skill of this guy. Ballistic Skill 14 with multi-HMG profiles. There is also a Plasma Rifle +1 burst HRL. That's the most expensive option. I really like Plasma. But even at 8-2 move with Climbing Plus, closing with that guy is not going to be easy. I think the HMG is going to be the default profile, and with Armor 8, BTS 6, and 3 structure, it's a main battle tag. It will absolutely be able to provide fire support and fight its way forward. It's got Tactical Awareness, very nice to combine with Lieutenant, 2 orders that model is generating, Climbing Plus, Remote Presence, and Techno-Organic. It's packing a damage 4 DACW and a heavy pistol, and that heavy pistol is actually quite relevant in combination with Guard. It's also got a Stoldron. Stoldron, I believe, have been upgraded with the most recent army patch, and at 8-2 move, it's actually going to be very compelling to just pop out a Stoldron at some point during the early turn. You're only giving up 2 inches of movement, just get that little thing out so it can go be a Willpower 13 specialist somewhere elsewhere on the board. Stoldron even have Climbing Plus these days. Frankly, you might even consider popping it out just for the close combat bonus so you can make 3 attacks in CC at CC 22. Now, this is an extremely cool package, but I do want to just sort of like stop and compare it to what else exists at the game. Because most of what you have here is a side grade to the Zeta unit. A Zeta clocks in at 70 points for the Lieutenant profile. It is exactly as durable, It has the same ballistic skill, but much better shooting. Well, better shooting, because a HRMC is one higher burst than a multi-HMG. And while 8.2 move is absolutely a more compelling speed than 6.4, both of them are fast climbing plus tags with big guns. If you use the Juggernaut just as a climbing plus plunging fire support piece, the only thing that really sets it apart from the Zeta is that it does have tactical awareness, which is absolutely worth some points, and it does have 8.2 movement, which is absolutely worth some points, but otherwise, it's a great deal more expensive than a Zeta in a faction that has a more expensive cheap end than O12's armies and sectorals. Where the differentiation really emerges, though, and what I think is really compelling, is that if we look at the Zeta, it is a model that is only comfortable in one role. The Zeta is a climbing plus, heavy fire support, ARO suppression, plunging fire kind of predator backline piece. It does not really want to move forward because all it has at close range is a heavy riot stopper. It doesn't even have a pistol, and a heavy riot stopper is a purely defensive element. You can't really fork an ARO with a heavy riot stopper because your opponent will just shoot you, and if you riot stopper them, they are still alive and you have to commit another order to put them down, which they will dodge, and Lord knows we've all seen the crit on the dodge at -6 and you just cry tears of blood. The Juggernaut, by comparison, isn't just comfortable, it excels at those short range bands. And that means that while it is also able to do most of the work that a Zeta does at long range with climbing for a few more points, it also gets to be not just comfortable but horrifically dangerous at short range as well. And that makes it a multi-role troop, and that is really interesting. Now, if it actually gets into close combat physically with an enemy CC expert, it is in trouble. You don't want this thing in combat with Achilles or Miyamoto Musashi, or even frankly anything with martial arts. But the power of guard is that you don't have to do that. You move to within 8 inches in your active turn, and depending on how they respond, you stuff them up. Guard is one of those skills that just doesn't offer a good ARO. Technically, you can respond with a close combat attack. If the Juggernaut declares its guard attack, that would be face-to-face roll, but here's the thing, the Juggernaut will not declare guard if you've declared close combat. Instead, it will shoot you while you stand there holding your sword for free and you will die. This is part of the value of the heavy pistol on this piece, although frankly I would have to do the math against a heavy pistol versus a multi-HMG at that kind of range band. I would imagine that once the modifiers get far enough down, you want to switch over to the heavy pistol, but against just an enemy out of cover where you're hitting on 11s, the HMG is probably better at burst 4. Basically, either way, this is a hell of a profile. It's very compelling. It's fast, it's dangerous, it does cool things at a variety of range bands. It is a really true centerpiece element. I am very excited for this thing. I think I like the Lieutenant profile most of all, but given it's not terribly more expensive, I would also give some consideration to an NCO profile in a list with an Ironside Lieutenant. Now that is an expensive setup, but if we don't see much other smoke elsewhere in the faction, Disco Ball will get you forward if you need to be, and that will let you take advantage of guard, and if you only need one lieutenant profile order to do that, for example, then you can use the NCO skill to spend any other lieutenant orders, you get attack aware, etc. Like the Ironside spent its attack aware, that still leaves the lieutenant order free, the Juggernaut gets the NCO, etc. You get a lot of orders out of 2 models there, if you can pay the premium. We're going to see the Juggernaut in a moment in a list where, to be fair, we couldn't quite accommodate the Ironside, but gosh darn it, we've just had to fall back on the Juggernaut Lieutenant profile instead, and I'm very happy with it. So let's take a look at this thing in situ. Here is, to conclude the video, our sample next wave list, basically just using models that are either already known profiles because they exist in Combined Army, or which have been shown off in this video. Now, the only assumptions I'm making here are that I wasn't willing to take more than one R-drone, really hoping that R-drones are AVA 2 or even 3 in this faction because it would really benefit from them, but for now I've taken just the one. We're otherwise assuming relatively standard AVAs, including AVA 2 Ichthydron Batroids, because they are AVA 2 in every sectoral and vanilla army that they exist in. So, Combat Group 1, the Juggernaut, multi-HMG Lieutenant profile. 2 Ichthydron Batroids and an R-drone, and then we have the first of 2 duos, Harbinger AP Marksman and Harbinger Forward Observer. Now, frankly, I will absolutely be looking to trade out at least one of these duos in future iterations of this list once I know what else I can take. But just to start with, for the purposes of this video, we're operating under a lot of constraints around the profiles we have access to, and so 4-line infantry as cheaply arranged to do things as I can make them are the order of the day, and so we have AP Marksman, Forward Observer. The Forward Observer is a specialist. It has a wild parrot. The AP Marksman fights okay with the link bonus. I can use them defensively in a pinch, and any spare orders that I might have will happily be spent throwing out those wild parrots and setting up a perimeter. We've then got a Medtech Obsidon Medconoid with a slave drone. Either the Medconoid himself or the slave drone will be bolted to that Q drone with a +1 burst Thunderbolt, just providing some defensive insulation. There's no E drone to buff them. The Thunderbolt is just there to stall out for time, in particular to stall out for time on the first turn if I'm going second, so I can get my other defenses set up. We've then got Bit and Kiss. This is the Killer Hacker profile with the pitcher. That's the one that I will almost always take. 2 pitchers and the cheaper price point is very appealing. And then a Glyph Warcore with the 360 visor. In Combat Group 2, we've then got Pandora with Chain of Command. Not an absolutely necessary precaution, but I would say quite valuable given we're running a very active lieutenant who is likely to be flung forward at some point during the game, and she is going to be part of a Haris fire team with 2 Tech Draken Steeljaws. I had the points to give both of them armed turrets, and I fully expect to make use of those armed turrets because I like armed turrets, and there is actually a line of play there that we'll talk about in just a moment. Finally, we're running Group 2 out with a second one of those infantry fire teams, a Harbinger, AP Marksman, and Forward Observer. Kind of the same deal. It adds a gun, it adds another deployable, it adds another specialist, and I did not have that much choice. If I knew, for example, that there were AVA-2 R drones in this faction, we windmill slam those out of the list, we put in an R drone, and go looking for something like a Cliff Racer. But at this early stage, I can't make that assumption. I don't have the R drone AVA, so for now we're going with a second line infantry duo. Now, there are a few things to talk about how this list plays, but I'm particularly happy with that Pandora fire team. Just because it's a wonderfully clean line of play on turn 1. That combat group has 2 irregulars and 3 regulars. I will be using probably 2 of those regular orders to have Pandora activate, move, and throw a pitcher. She's lingerable and ballistic skill 12, so it's pretty easy for her to get them down even at fairly long ranges. And at the end of that second order, she'll go prone, and I'll have used those orders not just to move the Tech Draken forward, but as part of that second regular order to actually fling them all the way forward out of Pandora's zone of control. At that point, even if she's a little back in the deployment zone, they can be well forward, and then they can use their irregular orders each to move forward again, like very far into the midfield at that point, and as the second short skill, put their turret down. Because turrets aren't reloadable, I don't care about flinging them all the way forward out of my baggage areas. And because combi turrets are very short range and restricted, I want those turrets really aggressively positioned to control 16-inch range bands in the midfield, ideally even kind of stacked with the Tech Drakens as AROs, to set up just an absolute nightmare of a midfield. In later turns, you've still got 3 regular orders in that list, and you can just go nuts with those Tech Drakens doing whatever, but they represent collectively just an incredibly productive use of your Group 2 orders to set up a perimeter that is just going to be absolute hell to punch through. And I am really here for that. And there are a lot of scenarios in the current ITS pack where that is just very valuable. Scenarios like corporate appropriation, area of interest. Oh, by the way, really glad they changed the name of that one. Even things like crossing lines are scenarios where being able to just build that defensive setup, build that perimeter with deployables and troops is very valuable. There are a ton of different positions you might occupy on a board in a scenario like area of interest, where having that perimeter established is incredibly useful. It's really good in corporate appropriation. It's good in classical pre-ITS 16 zone control scenarios, like frontline or supremacy, all of which are obviously still playable if you want to. I'm just really here for that. And I'm especially here for that because I love the Tech Drakens conceptually, and so a chance to use 2 of them makes me super happy. Combat Group 1 is obviously a fair bit more self-explanatory. It is mostly just built around the Juggernaut. One of the notable issues in this list is how much work the Juggernaut has to do, and that's kind of just a function of the limited roster that we're playing with when we build this. Future versions of this list will absolutely be able to find some efficiencies, squeeze in maybe a different gun, find some visibility control, etc. But for now, in this list, it's the Juggernaut's got to do work. And so kind of play him accordingly. He's 8-2 move, and because of how important he is in this list as the only real HMG platform, you have to play him, at least in the early game, more like a regular main battle tag. Move him forward, get some kills, suppress AROs, build your defensive setup with all of these deployables, pull him back and repair any damage that he sustained. He has remote presence, the medtech can reroll. Just keep him absolutely topped up because you need him turn after turn to suppress enemy AROs until the game is in that messy, dangerous midfield period, at which point by all means let him off the chain, go for the throat, get your guard kills. The list otherwise is flush with specialists. It can do loads of different classifieds. It's not quite suitable for a highly classified style mission, but it should be fine in anything short of like Achilles interference, and it can do loads of the things that I think are really compelling about this faction. Yes, would really have liked to have gotten a Cliff Racer in there. Yes, would really have liked to have gotten a Contrabandolero in there. Yes, really would have liked actually to have gotten a Rain Dancer in there, especially the forward deployment Rain Dancer, because it's another one of those pieces that I think is really cool, where it's a productive irregular. But ultimately, I wanted the Juggernaut in this list because the model is cool as hell, and until we see the entire faction, we're making some sacrifices on efficiencies. Still, I would be very comfortable playing this in a game, and I think it's an excellent harbinger of some of the potential that Next Wave has. Now, that wraps up this video. This was recorded in advance and will be going live midnight Saturday the 11th Australian Eastern Daylight Time, and so I don't know what other information will be out at time of release other than to say that I hope you find this interesting and I hope you enjoy it. Post in the comments what you're looking forward to. Which profiles are most interesting? Where do you stand on the aesthetic of the faction? And are you too a person of culture who appreciates Horizon Zero Dawn style robo-dinosaurs? I look forward to hearing from all of you, and otherwise, and as always, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.